This is Damascus Radio now. Stay tuned for the news.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. An army unit was able to capture a number of terrorists, including Muhammad Yassin Rifai, the most dangerous leader of an armed terrorist group, in addition to several members of his group in Deir al-Asafir village, which is to the eastern side of Damascus suburbs. Another army unit eliminated a number of terrorists, and they confiscated their weapons in the Zakri area, which is near Al-Kiswe. Among the terrorists were the terrorists named Rahman al-Musa, Muhammad Badoun, and Imad Musa, in addition to Bilal al-Khadr. Our armed forces have continued chasing down the fleeing terrorists in Aleppo and its suburbs. They destroyed 4 vehicles equipped with Dushka machine guns, and they killed a number of terrorists inside them on the Tel Rifat area, which is on the Aleppo roads in the suburbs. The army also destroyed the field hospital, 3 Dushka cars, and 3 anti-aircraft cars, in addition to 6 cars that were being used by the terrorists to transport the weapons and the ammunition. They also arrested the terrorists, and they destroyed their headquarters, which is in the suburbs of Aleppo. Over to you, Lama.
Thank you, Khaled. During their operations in Homs and its suburbs to clear Homs of the armed terrorist groups who wreaked havoc in the city, our armed forces seized Israeli-made weapons and killed a number of mercenary terrorists of Afghani and Chechen nationalities in a Zirai village in Al-Qusayr suburbs. The weapons seized included RPG shells, 2 rifles, 2 Israeli-made machine guns, 16 sniping guns, and several explosive devices weighing between 30 and 50 kilograms. They also killed a number of terrorists who tried to infiltrate from the Lebanese territories into Syria at Khirbat al-Imad site in Al-Qusayr suburbs. In Idlib, an army unit foiled an attempt by the armed terrorist group to infiltrate from Turkish territories into Syria at Tel Dahab site in the outskirts of Janudia village in Jisr al-Shur suburbs. Our armed forces clashed with the terrorist groups, killing a number of them and confiscating their weapons. Some of the terrorists fled into Turkish territories. The authorities also destroyed a number of vehicles equipped with machine guns and killed dozens of terrorists in Ma'arat and Noman. Over to you, Khalid.
Thank you, Lama. The Prime Minister, Dr. Wael Halaqi, has lauded the role of the government, in addition to the Syrian media, in confronting the conspiracy against Syria and exposing its dimensions and its goals, underlining that the Syrian media has succeeded in relaying the truth of the world's public opinion regarding the terrorism and the universal war that is targeting Syria, in addition to uncovering the misdirection campaigns that are being waged by the sedition channels and the mercenary media. During a meeting on Monday that he held with the Executive Office of the Journalist Union, Mr. Ilyas Imrad, and the members of the office, Dr. Halaqi said that the Syrian Arab Army is waging the battle against the terrorism with bravery, and it managed to inflict heavy losses upon the terrorist groups and restore security to the central areas, thanks to the Syrian unity. The Prime Minister also affirmed that the Syrian Arab Army will complete its mission and it will eliminate the armed terrorist groups as soon as possible. He also affirmed that the government has a commitment to providing the citizens' needs of food, medication, and petroleum byproducts, and ensuring the availability of all goods in the local markets, noting that there is a stockpile and that this stockpile is sufficient for the local needs despite the embargo and the sanctions that are being imposed on Syria. The meeting also tackled a number of professional and vocational issues related to the journalism and means of improving the media's performance, in addition to providing the union's needs and overcoming the difficulties hindering this project. In turn, head of the Executive Office of the Journalist Union, Mr. Ilyas Imrad, and the office members also hailed the government's efforts in supporting the national media and their work to ensure the availability of the goods and the stability of the Syrian pound's exchange rates and providing services. Back to you, Lama.
Thank you, Khalid. Information Minister Amran Zabi affirmed that what Turkish Foreign Minister Ahmed Davutoglu said reflects obvious political and diplomatic confusion and blundering. The Information Minister stressed that the Turkish government must stop destroying the future of the Turkish people, noting that Turkey's weight has decreased greatly under the current government. Minister Zabi said that Syria was among the first countries to call for differentiating between the concepts of resistance and terrorism as part of the Syrian people's values, rejecting occupation and domination. During a lecture at the International Terrorism Between Policies and Law seminar, Zabi said that the United States and the West ignored Syria's aforementioned goals as they are organically connected to the Israeli occupation entity, adding that the West and the United States refused such differentiation as they wanted to consider the resistance movements in Lebanon and Palestine and later in Iraq as resistance organization. On the events in Syria, Zabi said that there is no doubt that what has happened in Mali is merely terrorism since the beginning of the crisis. Minister Zabi said that this lecture, terrorism, was planned and organized by the local sides, connected partly to external agendas, highlighting that the external element has shifted to be the leader of the crisis. He underlined that the diplomatic and political efforts exerted by some external powers at international forums were just a cover for opening offices to recruit jihadists, bring mercenaries, and fund the gunmen in Syria. Zabi stressed that the Syrian leadership is always ready to hold national dialogue for the Syrian political and social powers with the aim of achieving Syria's higher national interest and preserving the unity of land and sovereignty as the sole way to achieve the political pluralism. Back to you, Khalid.
Thank you, Lama. The activities of the political forum are being continued. This forum is organized by the alliances of parties, the National Progressive Establishments, and it is entitled as The Political Dialogue and the National Reconciliation Are the Way to Restore Safety and Stability to Syria. This party, or this forum, is being held at the Dema Rose Hotel in Damascus. The participants in this forum have included their issues to reiterate the political dialogue, the army, and the terrorism confrontation, in addition to the national reconciliation and maintaining the state and its institutions. The interventions of the participants have concentrated on the importance of activating the national reconciliation in the face of all conspiracies, in addition to discussing the issues of the economic and social sectors and activating the economic sectors in order to support and to reassert the stability of the Syrian economy. The Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri Maliki stressed that the terrorism which is hitting Syria today is instigated by al-Qaeda elements. He reaffirmed that Iraq stands against the logic of overthrowing any regime by force, and he pointed out that only the dialogue among all Syrian sides can solve the crisis, adding that the sides which reject the dialogue should be obliged to go to the negotiation table. Over to you, Lama.
Thank you, Khalid. Speaker of the Iranian Shura Council, Ali Larijani, announced that Iran is ready to work for restoring calm and easing strain in the Syrian-Turkish relations. Larijani underlined the importance for removing strains in the relations between Turkey and Syria immediately, saying escalating disorders in the region harms the interest and the principle of unity among the Islamic states. In a relevant context, Larijani called on Turkey to exert more human efforts to release the Iranian visitors who were abducted by armed terrorist groups in Syria. China called for keeping away from any action that could escalate tension on the border between Turkey and Syria, stressing the necessity of respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the two countries and showing self-restraint. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Hong Li expressed in a press conference his country's concern with the current conditions in Syria and their repercussions. The Chinese spokesman's statement came at a time when the government of Recep Tayyip Erdogan continues escalating the situation and threats of action against Damascus, while going ahead with smuggling terrorists and weapons into Syria to disturb its stability. Over to you, Khalid.
Thank you, Lama. In occupied Palestine, the settlers are continuing their barbaric and hostile practices against the Palestinian people, targeting their source of living. In the occupied West Bank, settlers uprooted about 80,000 olive trees in the villages which are south of Nablus before the start of the harvesting season. The barbaric practices by the settlers against the Palestinian farmers are increasing this season as 10 million olive trees are being harvested by the Palestinians in both the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. The olive trees constitute a very important part of the Palestinian economy as they provide work for about 100,000 families, bringing in a profit of over $100 million every year. And over to our final item for tonight. An Iraqi officer and his soldier were killed, while 2 other soldiers were wounded in a terrorist double bombing west of the capital of Baghdad today, as a brigadier in the Ministry of Interior survived an assassination attempt while his driver was killed east of Baghdad. The Iraqi police said that 2 roadside bombs exploded sequentially, targeting an Iraqi army patrol as it passed by the area of Zainuddin, southwest of Abu Ghraib. The blast killed a captain and a soldier, and it left 2 other soldiers injured. The source also added that the police carried out a raid today, and they arrested 7 people who were suspected of being involved in this incident.
And that's the end of our news bulletin. Fortunately, thank you for listening.
Damascus Radio presents News and Views. The past few days commemorated the 39th anniversary of the October Liberation War, bearing its glorious spirit and sublime meanings. During that, the heroes of the Syrian Arab army have inscribed an epic which represents pride and glory in defense of the homeland. It was a sacred fight for the sake of liberating the lands and sanctities. As that memory is passing by at this critical span of time, the heroes of the Syrian army are engaged in fierce battles which are no less important than that war of 1973. However, there is a difference today. The enemy has transferred the battlefield into the Syrian inside, using the meanest, the most aggressive, and the most barbaric methods. The enemy depends on criminal terrorist groups in which various kinds of members are involved. Those include members from the Al-Qaeda organization mixed with the Wahhabi and the Takfiri groups, along with bad persons who unfortunately possess Syrian identities. Almost 40 years ago, Syria used to fight an enemy which occupied an Arab land, and that enemy is Israel. Yet, today, Syria is fighting an enemy which attempts to desecrate Syria, strike its national unity, and mess with its security and internal stability. So, in either case, the target shall remain the same, terminating the Syrian might, which is the only Arab power left in the ditch of confrontation with the Zionist enemy. Apart from all, the Syrians are fully confident, armed with faith, that the potentials of our Syrian army are able to fulfill the national and pan-Arab mission. Victory will be achieved undoubtedly, and it is not too far in time. That was News and Views from Damascus Radio. Syrian Local Press Review. The papers published today gave prominence to the following headlines and news items. Deputized by President Bashar al-Assad, Minister of State for the Presidential Affairs, Mansour Azzam, extends condolences on the demise of former Algerian President Al-Shadri bin Jdid. Prime Minister Wael Halqi meets the head and members of the Executive Bureau of the Journalists Union. The Forum on International Terrorism Between Policy and the Law winds up its works. Under the motto, political dialogue, national reconciliation, and combating terrorism are all our way for restoring security and stability. The political get-together on the alliance of the parties of the National Progressive Front starts its works. It found that there is no choice for the Syrians but to triumph the terrorism powers and tools. In a meeting held today, the Ministry of Economy and Trade launched the initiative of activating the roles of small and medium-sized projects for solving the economic crisis. The meeting included the authorities concerned from the public and private sectors. The front page editorial in Athora Daily says that there are elements of power and weakness in each side of the conflict in Syria, namely in the three dimensions of Syria: the internal, the external, and the regional. The Syrian opposition, with its internal and external parts, has faced a real problem which is related to missing a clear political program which it can raise before the public opinion. Besides, it is unable to form a congruent political structure in form and content. This made the opposition raise a political scheme which adapts with the strategies of foreign powers that eventually leads to a distortion of the Syrian political identity. Therefore, the political and military dimensions of the cure applied to the Syrian crisis pours in the Syrian National Authority interest, especially after the harsh and smashing strikes blown by the Syrian army forces, the paper concludes. That was a review of the Syrian local press issued in Damascus this morning.
Radio Damascus presents Quest for Peace, World's Option. Prepared by Afaf Nabalsi. Presented by Randa Qaddura. Sound technician Hamdi Shweki. Good evening to all of you. Culture continues to be a top-of-the-minders concern in the keen pursuit to preserve it amidst colossal lash-outs of flooding, deculturization ideas. To pacify these fears about the destiny of culture, there are intellectual garrison, like institutes which watchdog any anti-culture sneak. Damascus is proudful to have her long-time institute called the Arab Language Academy. On its board are highly talented devotees to upkeep the Arab Islamic culture in its major citadel, Arabic as language and thought. What for is this devotion to culture and heritage in this ever-mutating era? It is a question put forth by anti-culture or skeptical learners. Answer is ready. The Arab Islamic heritage is the culmination and combination of sets of values, principles, and contents inherited to safeguard both our present and the future. Culture is the work-out agenda for us and for the coming generations. Researchers find in heritage an historic and all-time difficult source of knowledge. Creativity and know-how, access to inventiveness, all inspired by ethical mottos that serve the cause of humanity and peace. This defining description is not exaggeration. Here is the reasoning. The Arab Islamic culture, compared to the Western civilization, which is vended as scientific, pins down so many flaws in the Western civilization. Comparison with the Arab Islamic culture expose that the Western civilization is riddled with unhumanistic faults that have nothing to do with science and reason. These faults are against values and humanistic principles. As such, the West civilization themes racism, hegemony, and every sinful act against peace. This kind of so-called civilization is up to self-exposure as to its flaws, such as its permissiveness and adaptability to every wrongdoing against the sublime ethics embodied in the cause of peace. Even in the language, the West civilization adopts so easily every abuse or bad turn of thought and expressiveness. Examples are numerous and sounder. Occupation is to them a status quo, or even more than that. When Iraq was occupied, the then American President George W. Bush held it as mission is accomplished. In their minds, they go back to erecting separation walls is a no-problem act. Analysts say split walls are in their hands. This criticism comes from a German intellect on the anniversary of the Berlin Mauer. He is stunned seeing the Israeli segregation wall remains unopposed by those who celebrated the collapse of the Berlin Wall. Listening to a new edition of the weekly program Quest for Peace, World's Option from Radio Damascus. With best regards from our sound technician Hamdi Shweki.
Syria today. A weekly program prepared by Ma'moon Samra and read by Lama Sayes. With the company of sound engineer Hamdi Shweki. Dear listeners, good evening and welcome to a new episode of our weekly program, Syria Today. Al-Halaqi reviving tourism and restoring its role in supporting the national economy. Prime Minister Al-Halaqi underlined the government's efforts to upgrade tourism and solve difficulties facing it to overcome the current stage and restore its role as a social and economic sector that contributes to supporting the national economy and the development process. The Premier was speaking while chairing a meeting for Tourism Higher Council. The meeting reviewed the situation of tourism sector in Syria and the challenges facing it. Ministry of Agriculture discusses cooperation with IFAD. Minister of Agriculture and Agrarian Reform Subhi Ahmad Al-Abdallah stressed the necessity for eliminating all obstacles facing the work of developing all the projects being carried out with the International Fund for Agriculture Development, IFAD. Al-Abdallah's remarks came during a meeting with IFAD delegation headed by Abdallah Drubi as the two sides discussed the joint cooperation. For his part, Drubi highlighted the need to intensify work to solve the obstacles that faces the projects, particularly the rural development projects in the northeastern region in Idlib and the integrated development of livestock. Drubi added that IFAD extend help for 9,000 households in a number of provinces and seeks to ensure additional aid. He pointed out that IFAD financed the rural development projects in Idlib with $18 million, which is scheduled to end by the end of this year. Syria today. A weekly program prepared by Ma'moon Samra and read by Lama Sayes. With the company of sound engineer Hamdi Shweki.
You're still listening to Damascus Radio. Before we sign off, here is a final look at the news summary.
Our armed forces continue to chase fleeing terrorists in Aleppo and its suburbs. In Idlib, Governorate, an army unit foils an attempt by an armed terrorist group to infiltrate from Turkish territories into Syria at Tel Dahab site in the outskirts of Ajnudiya village and Jisr al-Shughur suburbs. Prime Minister Dr. Wael Halqi loads the role of Syrian media in confronting the conspiracy against Syria. Information Minister Amran al-Zabi affirms that what Turkish Foreign Minister Ahmed Davutoglu said reflects obvious political and diplomatic confusion and blundering. Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki says that the terrorism which hits Syria today is ignited by Al-Qaeda elements. Speaker of the Iranian Shura Council Ali Larijani announces that Iran is ready to work for restoring calm and easing strain in the Syrian-Turkish relations. In occupied Palestine, settlers continue their barbaric and hostile practices against the Palestinian people through targeting their sources of living. And in Iraq, officer and a soldier are killed and two others soldiers are wounded in two blasts west of the Iraqi capital, Baghdad.
With this, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of our news transmission for tonight. Please join us again tomorrow at the same time and on the same frequencies. Till then, we wish you the best and good night.